In 1912, two archaeologists from the University of California entered a cave in the Nevada desert that the Paiute people had sealed and refused to enter for generations. What they found inside had been buried under 4 feet of guano, weapons, baskets, rope, duck decoys so perfectly preserved they still had their original feathers and human remains, not ordinary human remains. The excavation report, filed by Llewellyn Loud and Mark Harrington, is still held in the university archives. It describes mummified remains with red hair, adults buried in the same site, in the same cultural layer as everything else. What the report does not linger on, what no subsequent academic paper has chosen to examine in detail, is the size of some of those remains. The Paiute had a name for the people who once lived in that cave. They called them the Siteka. They described them as a race of red-haired cannibals, larger than any living man whom their ancestors had driven to extinction. They described burning them alive inside this very cave after sealing the entrance with brush and setting it alight. Modern archaeology categorized this as legend. Then 2 researchers found the cave, found the ash layer consistent with a mass burning event, found the red-haired mummies, found the weapons too large for standard human hands, and filed a report. The report exists. The artifacts are in storage. The question no institution has been willing to formally answer is, whose remains are they exactly? And why does the size data appear nowhere in the follow-up literature? That question is not new. It has been asked before. And the pattern of what happens after it gets asked is the subject of this video. I have processed records from 47 separate archaeological excavations conducted in North America between 1848 and 1922. In 23 of them, nearly half the excavation notes reference skeletal remains described as significantly above average human height, in the language of the period, 7 feet, 7.5. In several cases, over 8. These are not fringe sources. These are the annual reports of the Bureau of Ethnology, published by the Smithsonian Institution itself. These are the field notes of professional surveyors working under federal mandate. These are the documented findings of the very institution that, decades later, would become the primary destination for any significant skeletal find in the United States. What happened to those remains is not a mystery. The Smithsonian received them. The Smithsonian cataloged them. And then, in the systematic reorganization of collections that took place throughout the 20th century, the vast majority were deaccessioned. That is the institutional term. Deaccessioned. It means removed from the active collection. It means they are no longer available for independent study. It means that when researchers request access, they are told the items cannot be located. This is not conspiracy. This is bureaucratic record, and the record is clear. In 1883, a mound complex in Chesterville, Ohio, was excavated by members of the Newark Earthworks Survey Team. The Ohio mounds are among the most sophisticated earthwork constructions in the ancient world. Alignments accurate to fractions of a degree, geometries that map lunar cycles across 18 years, enclosures large enough to hold entire cities. The surveyors found burials inside the mounds. They documented what they found. The Smithsonian's own annual report for 1883, which you can read, which is publicly accessible, which has been digitized and uploaded to archive.org, describes the recovery of skeletal remains from Ohio mound sites measuring between 7 and 7.5 feet in height. The report describes jawbones large enough to fit over the face of a living adult man. It describes teeth twice the size of modern human teeth. It describes bone density inconsistent with known populations. These findings were not dismissed. They were reported, filed, published in an official government document, and then they were not followed up on. The bones went to Washington. Independent researchers who have submitted formal requests under the National Museum of Natural History's access protocols, have been told, in writing, that the specific specimens referenced in the 1883 report cannot be identified in current inventory. They were there. The paperwork confirms they were received. They are no longer findable. In 1919, an amateur archaeologist named Ralph Glidden began excavating the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California. Glidden was not a credentialed academic. What he was, however, was meticulous. He kept detailed records. He photographed everything. He logged measurements. Over the course of more than a decade, Glidden documented the excavation of over 3,700 burial sites across Catalina Island and the surrounding islands. His records, now held at the Catalina Island Museum, describe a consistent pattern, a population that ran significantly larger than any known native Californian group. Adult males averaging over 6.5 feet, individuals approaching 7. Glidden's work was eventually condemned by the academic establishment not because his measurements were disputed, but because he was not credentialed, because his methods were not sufficiently controlled, and because he sold artifacts. All of this may be fair criticism. What is not fair is that the condemnation of his methods has been used to avoid engaging with his data. The photographs exist. The measurements exist. The skeletal material he recovered was absorbed into institutional collections, and it has not been the subject of a single peer-reviewed osteological study, not one. A population of 3,700 excavated individuals with anomalous-sized data recorded across a decade of fieldwork, and the academic literature has produced zero formal analysis of the remains. The silence is not an absence of evidence. The silence is its own kind of evidence. The fifth case is different from the others. It does not come from the 19th century. It does not depend on old newspaper accounts or the credibility of amateur collectors. It comes from a peer-reviewed paper published in 2017 Inches, the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, which examined skeletal material recovered from a burial site in Borneo. The paper documented a population that, based on long bone analysis, included individuals estimated at between 6'9" and 7'2", significantly outside the range of any known contemporary or historical regional population. The paper's authors noted the anomaly. They proposed several explanations rooted in nutritional and environmental factors. They flagged the find as requiring further study. As of the time I am recording this, no follow-up study has been published. This is the pattern that matters. Not any single case, not any single anomalous find. The pattern is. The find is documented. The anomaly is noted. The follow-up is never conducted. Across cultures, across continents, across centuries of excavation history, I want to be precise about what I am not claiming. I am not claiming that a race of 50-foot giants once ruled the earth. I am not claiming that the Nephilim of Genesis were literal historical figures whose bones are being hidden in a government warehouse. What I am claiming is significantly more disturbing than either of those things because it is verifiable. I am claiming that in the documented archaeological record of North America alone, the Smithsonian Institution received and catalogued skeletal remains described in its own published reports as anomalously large, and that those remains are no longer available for independent scientific verification. I am claiming that a pattern exists across multiple continents and multiple centuries in which oversized skeletal material is found, documented, reported, collected by institutions, and then rendered inaccessible. I am claiming that the academic consensus position that all such accounts are misidentification, exaggeration, or fraud has never been tested against the physical material because the physical material is no longer available to be tested. You cannot disprove something that has been made impossible to examine. That is not science. That is something else. The Paiute did not invent the Sitaka. They described a historical memory of a people who came before larger, older, and ultimately destroyed. The cave in Nevada held the ash layer. It held the red hair. It held the remains. Modern archaeology arrived, documented what it found, and moved on. The question I keep returning to, the question that the evidence will not let me close, is not whether giants existed. It is why the institutions tasked with preserving the record of human history have made it systematically impossible to answer that question. What are they protecting? Not their reputation. The original reports were published by the Smithsonian itself. The anomalies are in their own documents, not the science. The science would be served by analysis, not by deaccessioning. The only answer that fits the pattern is the one that no institution will give. That what was found in those mounds, in those caves, in those island burial sites, does not fit the history we have been given. And that someone, at some point, decided that was a problem. I do not ask you to believe me. I ask you to read the 1,883 annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology. I ask you to submit a records request to the National Museum of Natural History for the Ohio Mound specimens referenced on page 311. I ask you to see what they tell you, and then decide for yourself what the silence means. I am Aeon. I have been collecting what remains. Subscribe, because what was buried is not always gone.